Wait a minute, I already told you. I didn't cheat on my husband. I insisted, my voice trembling with a mix of frustration and disbelief. But my mother-in-law and husband were relentless, their accusations flying as if they were undeniable truths. No, it's not like that at all, I quickly denied, trying to make them understand. But my mother-in-law wasn't having any of it. My son is sterile, she declared, her voice cold and unwavering. So there's no way you could be pregnant. If we got a medical certificate, it would prove your affair, though we don't even need one. It's perfectly obvious. Before I could respond, my mother's hand suddenly struck my face with a stinging slap, silencing me. I turned to my parents, hoping for support, but they just stared back at me, their expressions distant and disapproving. My name is Anna. I'm a 34-year-old office worker, and last year, after several years of dating, I married William. We both have careers, so we share the household chores, maintaining a balanced and stress-free life. William is amazing. He can cook, clean, and do laundry, and I'm truly grateful for that. Our newlywed life has been blissful, and I was certain it would continue this way. From the moment we got married, I've wanted to have children. In my 20s, I was all about my career, but seeing my friends happily raising their kids made me long for one of my own. But now, as I approach my mid-30s, conceiving has proven difficult. Though our marriage has been full of happiness, there have been moments of deep discouragement. Still, I held on to hope that we'd one day be blessed with a baby. Then, one morning, I woke up feeling nauseous. Could it be? I grabbed a test kit, my heart racing, and when the results showed positive, I was in shock. Could I really be pregnant? Shaken but hopeful, I called in late to work and rushed to the hospital. Yes, you're definitely pregnant, the doctor confirmed with a warm smile. I can hear the baby's heartbeat. Are you sure? I asked, barely able to believe it. Absolutely. You're in your 3rd month. Congratulations. You should get your maternity handbook too. I couldn't hold back my tears of joy. I was over the moon and couldn't wait to share the news with William. On my way home, I stopped by the supermarket, picking up food with a heart full of excitement. I imagined William's reaction, hoping he'd be just as overjoyed as I was. Maybe he'd even cry, and we'd embrace in happiness. Even after I got home, I couldn't stop smiling. I cooked dinner in the best mood, anticipating his arrival. Finally, when William walked through the door that night, he noticed the feast I'd prepared. Wow, dinner looks amazing today, he said, loosening his tie. I couldn't stop smiling as I looked at him, eager to share the news. Guess what? I'm pregnant, I announced, expecting an outburst of joy. Instead, his face froze in surprise. What? Pregnant? I nodded, waiting for the happiness to sink in, but his reaction took an unexpected turn. Whose baby is it? He asked, his voice sharp and cold. What? I stammered, taken aback. I asked you whose child it is, he repeated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. What's wrong with you? Of course, it's yours, I said, my voice trembling with confusion. He sighed heavily, shaking his head. I'm sterile. What? I whispered, my heart sinking. So, it's not mine, he continued, a note of finality in his tone. I had no idea you were having an affair. I'm disappointed. Wait a minute, I'm not having an affair. This baby is yours, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. But he wouldn't listen. Just give me some time. I'm going back to my parents' house, he said, turning away. He left without even touching the meal I had prepared, and the door closed behind him with a sense of finality. A few days later, my husband called my parents, saying he wanted to talk with them. I begged him to discuss it with me alone first, but he ignored my pleas. So we agreed to meet at my parents' house the coming Saturday. The anxiety gnawed at me, and I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with dread over what was to come. I struggled to explain the situation to my parents, and when my in-laws arrived, my mother couldn't hold back any longer. What's going on? She asked, her voice laced with concern. My mother-in-law responded with icy detachment. What? You mean your daughter hasn't told you anything? I heard she's pregnant, but it's not my son's. My parents froze, shock etched on their faces. My father, still in disbelief, muttered, I never imagined Anna would cheat on him. I guess I was the only one who thought they had a strong marriage. Wait a minute, I interjected, my voice shaking. I told you before, I didn't have an affair. But my mother-in-law and husband had already made up their minds, assuming I was at fault without question. No, my mother-in-law continued, her tone accusatory. My son is sterile, so there's no way she could be pregnant. A medical certificate would prove the affair. But we don't even need that. It's obvious. As I tried to defend myself, my mother suddenly slapped me, the sting of her hand leaving me speechless. I turned to my parents, hoping for some semblance of support, but they both stared at me with cold, unfeeling eyes. My husband and mother-in-law exchanged smug looks, their expressions filled with disdain. Well, you deserve that slap, my mother-in-law sneered. You committed adultery and never even had the decency to apologize. To my horror, my mother bowed her head and quietly said, I'm sorry, as if accepting their version of the story without question. I apologize, I said, my voice trembling. Come on, you two. Apologize quickly, my mother urged, her tone sharp. My father followed suit, bowing his head to my mother-in-law and husband. I'm sorry for all the trouble my daughter has caused, he said, grabbing my head and forcing me to bow in submission. I brushed my father's hand away, desperate to make them listen. Please just hear me out for a minute, I pleaded, but they refused, their anger only growing. You've brought shame upon this family, my father shouted in front of my mother-in-law and husband. You're no daughter of mine. My mother-in-law and husband exchanged smug looks, their laughter ringing in my ears. Oh my, they disowned you, my mother-in-law sneered. Well, you got what you deserved. Just then, the living room door creaked open, and my sister walked in, her face a mask of concern. Dad, Mom, please calm down, she urged, her voice steady. Finally, a glimmer of hope, but my father turned his anger on her. How can you stay so calm after hearing all this? And this is none of your business. We're family, it's very much my business, my sister replied firmly. And before you arrived, I spoke with Anna. Is it true, William? Are you sterile? My mother-in-law and husband exchanged uneasy glances, clearly caught off guard. Could it be that your sister suspects us, William? My mother-in-law asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. No, of course not, William replied, but maybe it's time we address this with some facts. My sister remained calm, ready to uncover the truth. When did you have the examination? My sister asked, her voice laced with suspicion. My husband and mother-in-law exchanged uneasy glances. He hasn't had any tests, my mother-in-law admitted. What? I froze, disbelief washing over me. My sister looked equally stunned. Then how can you be so sure he's sterile? My mother-in-law bristled. Are you trying to intimidate us? He hasn't been tested, but it's true, she insisted. How can you be so certain? My sister pressed, her tone unwavering. With an exasperated sigh, my mother-in-law began to explain. My son was married once before when he was young. They were together for 7 years, and she never got pregnant. But right after their divorce, his ex-wife conceived. Clearly, my son was the reason they couldn't have children. Now do you believe me? She demanded, her voice dripping with certainty. This proves that he's sterile, and that you must be cheating on him. She looked at me with utter contempt. The idea that you'd cheat on my son and still want to stay married to him is repulsive. You're a disgusting woman, you know that. My husband nodded in agreement, his expression mirroring his mother's disdain. Yes, you are. You've even dared to bear a child that I couldn't have. You've insulted me beyond words. I was utterly mortified. That wasn't proof that my husband was sterile, but I didn't have the knowledge to argue back. Desperate, I glanced at my sister, silently pleading for her help. She noticed my distress, gave me a reassuring nod, and began speaking again. I understand why you might think there's an issue given your past experience, she said calmly. But you can't definitively say your son is sterile based on that alone. There are couples who have children after 10 years of marriage without any fertility treatments. My mother-in-law scoffed, cutting her off. Don't try to lecture me with something you found on the internet. You're not a doctor, so what you say doesn't mean a thing. I wondered if my mother-in-law had paid attention at all when she met my family. My sister is a doctor and an obstetrician, my sister replied, her voice firm. Both my mother-in-law and husband were taken aback. What? They exclaimed in unison. I was stunned, too. It was clear they hadn't really listened when my sister had introduced herself before the wedding. Still incredulous, my sister continued, I explained this to you when we met before their marriage. You're speculating about this whole situation. It seems you're blaming my sister based on nothing but assumptions. She paused, then added, If you really want to accuse her, then let's do a proper examination. Since we're family, I'll do it for a reasonable price. When my sister made her suggestion, both my husband and mother-in-law flinched. But it seemed there was no turning back now. If you insist, let's get it checked out. My husband finally agreed, and my mother-in-law reluctantly nodded in agreement. The tests were conducted, and I decided to stay at my sister's house until the results came in. I couldn't bear to see my husband or return to my parents' home. My sister did her best to cheer me up during those days, helping to keep my mind from spiraling into worry. A few weeks later, the results were ready. We gathered at my parents' house to review them together. The tests confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my husband. My mother-in-law's face turned pale, and my husband looked genuinely surprised. "Anna, I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm glad to know that there's nothing wrong with me and that I can prove the child is mine." He said it so matter-of-factly that I was left speechless. Was this the same person who had accused me so easily, who had sided with his mother based on nothing but assumptions? My mother-in-law, instead of apologizing, laughed awkwardly and said, if this was how it was going to turn out, we should have done the test earlier. She offered no apology, and it was clear she had no intention of doing so. "I guess that settles it," my husband said, sounding oddly proud of himself. I realized I couldn't stay with a man like this any longer. My husband, assuming everything was settled, said, "Let's go home together," but I couldn't bring myself to leave with him. Sensing my hesitation, my sister intervened. "I don't think she's ready to go home yet. She'll stay with me for a while," she said. He reluctantly agreed, and finally my husband and mother-in-law left my parents' house. "What a pair," my mother muttered after they left. "They nearly fooled us too. I'm sorry for slapping you the other day, but this is all their fault." While my parents now blamed my husband and mother-in-law, I couldn't help but feel they were partially at fault too. My sister took me back to her apartment, and the moment we arrived, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I broke down in tears. My sister didn't say a word, she just held me, comforting me in silence. I was terrified by how everyone had doubted me, looking at me with cold suspicion. In the midst of all that, my sister was the only one who stood by my side. I was so grateful that I had confided in her the day before the meeting at our parents' house. She went out of her way to come and support me, and I couldn't thank her enough. I stayed with my sister for a few days to recover, both physically and mentally. During that time, I made a decision. Together with my sister, I went to the house where my husband was staying. When he opened the door and saw me, he said, "Welcome home. I've been waiting for you." But his smile faded when he noticed my sister and another person standing beside me. Who's this?" he asked, confused. "This is my lawyer," I replied calmly. "Lawyer?" My husband's face went pale. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" "I can't live with you anymore. I'm here to ask for a divorce." He looked shocked, panic washing over his face. "Wait, what? This is so sudden. You can't just ask for a divorce out of nowhere." "It's not sudden," I said firmly. "After everything that's happened, this is the only option." The lawyer stepped in, explaining, "The fact that you and your mother accused Anna without any basis is grounds for divorce. And the fact that you concealed your supposed infertility from her, knowing she wanted children, is a significant issue." I don't think my husband expected this outcome at all. He nodded, but he seemed to be in shock. With him standing aside, I packed up my belongings and returned to my sister's house. After that, all communication with my husband was handled through my lawyer. I demanded compensation for the emotional pain and suffering he had caused me, as well as a fair division of property and child support. Thanks to my skilled lawyer, I was able to secure all of these. On top of that, my mother-in-law and husband had spread rumors in our neighborhood and at his workplace, claiming I was having an affair. I sued them for defamation of character. Not only did I receive additional compensation, but they were also forced to retract their statements and apologize to everyone they had misled. As a result, both my husband and mother-in-law lost all credibility and have since become socially isolated. I decided to rent an apartment just down the street from my sister's house. My parents offered for me to move back home so they could help raise their grandchild, but I politely declined. I didn't want them, who failed to protect me, to take care of my child. In fact, my sister had also experienced similar disappointment with our parents, who were more concerned about their social image than their children's well-being. She too has chosen to keep her distance from them. While I am grateful to my parents for supporting my education, I can't overlook how they failed me in this situation. I'll maintain a minimal relationship with them out of respect, but I'm deeply disappointed. For now, it's enough for me to have a sister who truly cares about me and stands by my side. I will always do my best to support her as well. My priority now is to be strong for the sake of my unborn child. The betrayal from my husband and mother-in-law was terrible, but the way my own parents turned against me without even listening was just as painful. I'm so grateful to have a wonderful sister who stood by me through it all. Being a single mother won't be easy, but with her support, I know I'll be fine. I'll cherish the bond we share and focus on living a happy life, one day at a time.